This one goes out to one of our earliest followers and Patreon subscribers, Is Long, because she has been begging for the Moth Mussy for like months now, as well as the Thorn Bussy. I don't know if she'll ever get either. But this one's for you. I'm Aidan Mattis, and welcome to the Lore Lodge. The story of Mothman centers around Point Pleasant, West Virginia, a sleepy little town of about 4,500 people located on the junction of the Ohio and a river that starts with K that I cannot pronounce. But if you go on the internet, I'm sure you can find it. Anyway, Aidan will probably just put the name of the other river right here. Now, Point Pleasant started off its history as the location of a bloody battle between colonists and an alliance of Native American tribes in the region. To the people of Point Pleasant, this is actually an event to celebrate. It was, I believe, October 10th, 1774, and they celebrated the 200th anniversary of this in 1974. Now, for the Native Americans of the region, probably not as much of a celebratory event. That would kind of be like us celebrating the burning of the White House during the War of 1812. Probably just wouldn't happen. Thankful that the British have been kind enough to not make a national holiday out of that. After the battle, though, a permanent militia encampment was founded called Camp Point Pleasant, and that remained in operation until the settlement was firmly incorporated into Virginia in 1833. You have to remember that West Virginia, up until 1861, was a part of Virginia. Virginia was just absolutely massive. But as I just said, secession became an issue for the people of Point Pleasant because most of them had more northern sensibilities. And while the man who was sent to Virginia's delegation, their House of Representatives, while the man who was sent to the Virginia Secession Convention in 1861 was himself a slave owner, he was against secession from the Union. So he voted actually in favor of remaining a part of the Union. Nevertheless, Virginia seceded from the United States, became part of the Confederacy, and West Virginia, as we know it today, split off from the larger state to become what it is now, which is absolutely the most insanely beautiful place in America. Now, I will say, despite my love for West Virginia's topography and geography, as much as I love it, there is one factor about it that I absolutely cannot abide, and that is the fact that it shares a border with Ohio. Anyway, back to the Civil War. When West Virginia seceded, it was not a clean break. So the town of Point Pleasant and the surrounding county, Mason County, West Virginia, sent soldiers to both sides. They sent about 1,000 to the Union and 61 to the Confederacy. So Confederate L right there. Then, during World War II, Point Pleasant was the site of a ammunition manufactory and storage site, which would operate through the course of the war, and then when the war was over, it would shut down, become defunct, and eventually be turned into a wilderness preserve, as it is today. Now, there is an official name for it, but most people just refer to that as the TNT area, which I really appreciate, because that is some perfect descriptive nomenclature. But after the war, that TNT area was abandoned. You see, in 1966, on November 15th, two couples were riding in a car. These were Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Marie Millette. Now, what happened was they were driving along a highway, I believe it was Route 2, around near the TNT area. And what happened to them was that they reported seeing a large man with wide wings and glowing red eyes, but to be particular, the eyes only started glowing in the light of the car's headlights. So they say they saw a large man with a 10-foot wingspan and eyes that glowed in the light. They report this to the police investigate, but they don't really find anything. But, of course, the story gets out, and over the course of the next year, there are dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of reported sightings of the Mothman. Everyone in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, knew somebody or had their own story of an encounter with the Mothman. And this would continue for about 13 months. Now, there is variation in the stories. In some cases, they don't say it was, a 10-foot wingspan. They'll say it was just large. Or that in some cases it has feathers. In some cases it has fur. In some cases it's kind of fuzzy like a moth. But what does remain the same is that it is as large as a man in stature, has a very broad wingspan, and glowing red eyes that glimmer in the light. In some cases, these eyes are reported as being like the reflective lights on the back of a bicycle, so it kind of gives you an idea what they were dealing with at the time. But there are hundreds of these reports throughout the next 13 months, up until December 15th, 1967, the day that the Silver Bridge, which is in Point Pleasant and stretches across the Ohio River into Ohio, that bridge collapsed, killing 46 people. And after that, Mothman was not seen in the area again until scattered reports from decades later, including one as recently as, I believe, 2016. Now, there are other additions to the story. In some cases, people were reporting that their animals went missing or that they heard buzzing from the electronics inside of their house. Just little other odd, strange occurrences, which may have been attributed to the Mothman simply because it was a hot topic, or perhaps it actually was doing something. We'll get into what it could have been if this is a real paranormal creature later in the video. Contemporary explanations for what the Mothman was included weather balloons that had reflective lights attached to them, reflective panels. In one such story, it was a balloon that a bunch of construction workers were using to mess with people, and they stuck reflective tape on it and just let it float. But that doesn't really explain why they would suggest that it had a wingspan or that it was the size of a man. So one of the other explanations is, oh, well, maybe it was a sandhill crane, which are known to be in the area, but while they do have red coloring around their eyes and a 6 to 7 foot wingspan, they don't quite match the description. And also, you wouldn't just stop seeing them randomly after 13 months if they were nesting in the area. You would see them every year. You would have reports of these every year. So it doesn't make a ton of sense that you're just looking at this and going, oh, well, it's a crane. No, that doesn't make sense. One of the other options, one of the other explanations from that time period is that it was a barn owl. Barn owls do have reflective red eyes, they do have large wingspans, and they are often mistaken for being supernatural creatures because of the way that they are pretty silent when they fly and also how owls can rotate their heads almost 360 degrees. So there's a number of reasons to be frightened of an owl, but who can really say for sure if we were dealing with an owl or something supernatural here? Arguably, the simplest explanation for all of this is that a couple of people saw something, misunderstood what they saw, and when they went and reported it and the story got out, you had mass hysteria, and suddenly everyone was seeing this thing. Now, that's not to discount it and to say that it absolutely was mass hysteria and not some sort of supernatural creature, but I just want to give you an idea of what the contemporary explanations for this phenomenon were. But we should talk about the Silver Bridge collapse, because that was kind of the inciting incident for Mothman, going from being a local folktale and a curiosity to being what it is today, which is a harbinger of doom. And it has been seen all over the world, supposedly, allegedly.
Allegedly.
So, part of the issue with the Silver Bridge disaster is that obviously it was a horrible thing that killed 46 people, and it was because of an issue with one of the structural pieces of the bridge. That it was a 55-foot long piece, and it got it corroded or something. The point of the story is it caused the bridge to collapse with a large number of people on it, and out of the some 60 or so people that fell into the water, only about 15 lived. And this bridge collapsing exactly 13 months to the day after the first Mothman sighting led to this idea that the Mothman is a harbinger of doom, that it's telling you something bad is going to happen. And when it appears, it's not fun, it's not something that you necessarily make light of, it's something that should concern you. Of course, starting in 2002, Point Pleasant started the Mothman Festival, and now they celebrate Mothman every year on the third weekend in September. So there's a number of confluences in this story. So there's the initial sighting near the TNT area, there's the Silver Bridge disaster, and there's the belief that Mothman either inhabits or inhabited the TNT area in one of those bunkers. Now, is it possible for something to live in one of those bunkers? Absolutely. They are not closed to the public, or at least some of them are, but you can still open some of them. I think rather recently, the last 10 years or so, it might have been 2010, one of those bunkers actually exploded because it was full of unstable materials. Nobody was killed or hurt, but they're hazardous. So one of the theories has been that this was not actually a paranormal creature, but rather some of those bunkers were still being used, and this was some sort of military tech, a flight suit or some sort of early exosuit that somebody might be using. It seems pretty unlikely. Like, honestly, the idea of a late 1960s flying exosuit being used by somebody from the military in a abandoned TNT area, that just doesn't sound very legitimate or real to me. Plus, there's been sightings of the Mothman elsewhere. Now, those might be hoaxes, but where were those things? Well, some of the significant sightings were that, again, this is apocryphal, but supposedly the workers at Chernobyl in the days, weeks before the disaster saw a horrific visage of a giant black bird with the body of a man and glowing red eyes flying around the power plant. Now, the only stories we get of that are from people who got it from people who died as a result of the Chernobyl disaster. So people who, with their dying breath were like, I saw the black bird. There's no way to confirm it because everyone who ever reported it is dead. Other important sightings, people claim to have seen Mothman before 9/11 flying around New York. The I-35 bridge collapse, very similar to the Silver Bridge collapse. People reported that they had seen Mothman before the bridge collapsed, but of course they didn't report this until after the collapse. Same with 9/11 and same with Chernobyl. And again, with the swine flu outbreak in Mexico in 2009, people claimed after the fact to have seen a black figure flying around with glowing red eyes about the size of a man. Finally, there were reports circling around in early 2020 up through today that people saw the black bird or the Mothman or the angel of death, whatever you want to refer to this thing as, flying around Wuhan, China. And to give you an idea of how this isn't just necessarily confined to West Virginia, this kind of thing is rather common, especially in American folklore. You've got the belled buzzard, which is another southern tradition of in this case specifically, a buzzard or a turkey vulture that wears a bell and flies around. And one idea was that this was just a practice, that people would put bells on vultures if they caught them to alert to when they were around. Or there is the theory that that the belled buzzards were not the result of people attaching bells physically to buzzards, but rather one consistent paranormal creature that was persistent throughout the ages. There's also the banshee, which, while not a winged man with red eyes, is a harbinger of doom, something that screams, something that appears to you in the weeks or days before a tragedy. There is also the Flatwoods Monster, which is much closer to Mothman than just about anything else. It's also from West Virginia. And the Flatwoods Monster is reported to have been seen after a bright object coursed through the sky, and then some teenagers who were going to investigate saw basically the path, and they went towards it, and they looked up into a tree with their flashlights, and this was in the 50s, by the way. So this does predate Mothman. So this was in the 50s. They shined their flashlights up at the tree, and what they saw was a black figure with glowing red eyes. And then, before they knew what was happening, they reported that it jumped out of the tree, opened its wings, and flew towards them, screeching. So again, in this case, the explanation, 50 years later, the explanation from the authorities was that it was a barn owl, which seems so convenient. Every time that there's something out in the woods that flies, they're just like, oh, it's a barn owl. I understand Occam's razor, it could be a barn owl, but at a certain point, you gotta investigate something, man. Like, you gotta actually put in the work. You can't just assume everything's a barn owl, unless it's the case of, for example, the Owl Man from Cornwall, in which case it was probably just an owl. A couple of little girls who reported they saw an owl man hovering above a church steeple, and well, there's a good chance that was just an owl. As for the Flatwoods Monster, though, that actually got wrapped up in a lot of UFO stories, because the 1950s were like big on UFOs, so they thought it was an alien. It seems more likely that it was either a barn owl or, if Mothman's real, Mothman, because the location just makes sense in that case. Since 1967, people have reported seeing Mothman before lots of major disastrous events. But usually those reports don't come in until after the disaster has occurred, and in that case, it could just be people making it up to get attention. However, in West Virginia, in Point Pleasant specifically, there are a lot of people still alive who vividly remember the 1960s and who vividly remember the Silver Bridge disaster and swear, they are certain that Mothman is real and that they saw Mothman. So even if you're skeptical, there's a not insignificant number of people living in Point Pleasant to this day who swear by this thing. And I think that is fascinating. So I want to know what you guys think. So have you seen Mothman? Have you heard a Mothman story from somebody? Do you think that all of these sightings that are after the fact are real? Are they fake? Are they just people clout chasing? Just let us know. And if you like what we're doing here at the Lore Lodge, you can check us out on Patreon. We have $1 through $100 tiers for support, and some of them come with fun perks. If you pledge at least $10, we will send you a handwritten letter. And I know I've been saying that for a long time, but I actually have a stack of them here that are all already written. They're written out. So these actually are going out. I do these. I know people don't believe me because I get distracted and sidetracked easily. If you want the Moth Mussy, hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this with a friend, and maybe they too can get the Moth Mussy. I'm Aidan Mattis, and thanks for stopping by the Lore Lodge.